It's time for another Two Women Talking. Song is healthier again this time. We're taking a big swing on this one. We're talking fair criticism versus misogyny, something that's coming up a lot in general. How do you criticize something made for women and possibly other groups and know it's coming from a place that isn't unduly biased? Now, the song, you had specific reasons for talking about this, so I'm gonna let you start. Where do you want to begin? Because we were pulling from a lot of places to land on this topic, right?
Oh gosh. We've been talking about this for a while, so I'm trying to remember everything that led to it. Part of it, let's start with the basic of, being in the romance novel community and seeing people there and how they talk about the fact, oh, well, people are only critical of romance because it's something women enjoy. And, it's just misogyny. And I'm sitting there going, okay, look, I'm sure it's come to a point where it started out where it's like, oh, it's romance. It's what women read back in the 50s and 60s and stuff. It's not important. It's not literature, which it's not, but that's fine. And the interesting thing is, we say, oh, well, they just criticize it because it's what women like. I get judged more for liking classic pulps than I do for saying I like romance novels.
Really?
So that's why I'm like, I don't really know if it's just misogyny. It's just snobbery.
There's snobbery, but I mean, to say all criticism of romance is misogyny, yeah, that's different than saying a mediocre romance novel gets trashed harder than a mediocre sci-fi novel because of the double standard there. That's a different criticism, and that's what makes it so tough, right?
Yeah. And granted, I will absolutely agree that there is a level of misogyny to it, and there is that whole issue, but it's brushing it off so much. And it also extends to, it's anytime you want to say something constructive to a woman,
right?
It's like, how dare you? You can't tell a woman, hey, you're doing your lipstick wrong, because
it's just sort of objective, right?
Yeah. And it's like, you say something. I made the mistake of making a comment once, and someone was like, I think she looks great. And I'm like, to help her look better. It's so frustrating because
it would make your message resonate more if you did these things, is not shut up, woman.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm trying to help you.
Yeah. But, and I mean, somebody doesn't care, if that's their thing and they don't care, well, that's fine. There's plenty of criticism I get that I don't care about. Someone in my YouTube comments went on this lengthy tirade that basically amounted to, you remind me of my mother and I hate my mother. Obviously, I'm going to dismiss that, right? That is misogynistic. That was, whoa, okay.
But that's also, you're the problem, not me.
Well, yeah. And if somebody corrects me on a fact and I can verify it, that's very different. Oh, yeah. And it is hard because there are a lot of things I've encountered, not just about, because, okay, let's face it, every woman is not just a woman, right? There's more to us than that. This idea that I'm jumping around. Oh my God. Let's start here. I think that part of the problem with women and criticism is that there's this internalized belief that if we're not perfect, we're bad. And that's very strong, this idea that we have to put this perfect illusion forward in a way that men don't. Men are allowed to screw up. Men are allowed to be unlikable. Men are allowed to be abrasive and get away with more. And so I understand the sensitivity and I understand being careful, but it can fall into the realm of not listening to the stuff that is trying to help. And I think that you cut on you hit on a really important point, that I listen to criticism from someone who understands what I'm doing, because if they don't, what's the point? Right.
And that's something
it's a
really
werewolf cookbook review.
Yeah, that's something that's really important to consider, where it's like, okay, and that's something, as a writer, I've learned, okay, if someone gives you criticism, you take it with a grain of salt. You decide whether or not that criticism will work with the story you're trying to tell. If someone tells you, oh, I want more werewolves in my cookbook, then you know that that's not the story you're trying to tell. Now, obviously, you can't use this as an excuse to say, oh, well, no one understands my work because I'm just smarter than it. No. You still need to be able to take criticism and look at things objectively. And I think way too many people are way too close to their work and they don't know how to take it objectively.
Yeah. And I'll call it a piece of criticism I received about this show about this, because somebody talked about near the end of one of the ones we recorded when you were sick. They complained I was talking too much as usual. And I knew I talked more in that episode than I normally do. I kind of winced when I was editing it. And it was because it was less than perfect circumstances. And that's an example where the guy was being a hater. He was being an asshole. He wasn't wrong. Right.
Yeah.
And it was a fundamental attribution error, but he wasn't wrong. And that's the sort of thing of, all right, broken clock, but he completely, this is one thing I think is a marker of fair criticism versus unfair criticism. When someone tries to divine your motives instead of just pointing out the error in execution, and the motives are wrong, a creator's not going to listen to you.
Yeah, and that's a huge difference than just saying, hey, this is something that stood out to me.
Right.
So
yeah. And it's like, okay, this isn't, somebody in entertainment said to somebody who passed this on to me once, they can't all be your best gal. You are gonna, especially when you have, regular content, even people who make big things like novels or movies, some of them just don't come together. We talked about that before, right? Yeah. Some things just don't come together. Everybody knows it. That's different than stuff that you can benefit from sitting with. I don't know if that makes sense. Like, okay, I actually have to change my tactic here, as opposed to, okay, that one was just a disaster. Yeah. And we're going to move on. There's nothing I can really learn from it because it was such a comedy of errors that, yeah. And I mean, it is subjective.
Yeah.
And I know that one of the things I don't like about how hostile things tend to get is it does get extremely difficult to know who's coming at you well-meaning. And there's, I'll do 4 quadrants on this. There's well-meaning and knowledgeable. There's bad faith and knowledgeable. So there's haters and knowledgeable, right? Then there's well-meaning and not knowledgeable. And then there's haters and not knowledgeable. Now,
sounds about right.
Obviously, I did that in order of, descending who you should listen to. So somebody who is well-meaning and knowledgeable, obviously you should listen to that. But some people who hate your guts and are knowledgeable are also people you should sometimes listen to. And that's the tough one, right? Yes. But I think we'll get to that in a bit, because obviously I have a lot of those. But then you've got people who are well-meaning, but don't know what the hell they're talking about. And sometimes they're good to listen to as well, just because they're giving you the feedback of a layman, not somebody who is so inside. I mean, sometimes I listen to, it happens a lot in video games, but it happens a lot in anything highly technical, that there's so much philosophizing about, say, you know, the choice, the illusion of choice versus actual choice, and whether a choice that actually has a tangible consequence in terms of, you know, the payouts, the loot drops on something, whether that's truly a moral choice or not. For someone to make a completely moral choice, it has to be devoid of consequence. That's not life, right? You have to balance it, and there's no right or wrong answers there, but people get really intent on the philosophies, and then you get the regular person going, I don't know what the fuck y'all talking about, I just want to play the game, is it fun? And there's an example of somebody who doesn't know any of this stuff, doesn't know how to do a proper user interface, doesn't understand the ins and outs of the terminology of user experience. But if you only go for the design nerds, you're going to get a product that's usually pretty impenetrable.
Yeah.
Right?
Sometimes you need people who can say, I can't tell you why, but this does or does not work for me.
Yeah, like remember that thing we were going on about the top 10 art for the It's Not Therapy website? And
yes,
I was lost. I'm like, please explain this to me. But I listened, and ultimately it ended up being inverting a foreground and a background. That was not where we started, but it was hilarious comedy of errors in terms of breakdown and communication. But eventually the product was better because I didn't just go, this is subjective opinion. No, you know. And it's funny because one of the big criticisms I get is I don't listen to criticism, and it's ridiculous. I mean, my problem is I actually had to learn how to shut out the criticisms of the people that didn't understand me, don't get what I'm doing, and just wanted everything to be tailored for them. And so go ahead.
That is a whole issue in and of itself, where it's, and I've seen it especially in comics, where it's like, okay, how do I say this? People came in and said, we want this to be an area that's more accepting of women,
right?
Which isn't bad,
right?
But it's also like, okay, but there's a better way to do this than taking away something that for a lot of men was a safe space. Like whether it had issues or was problematic or whatever, there's a better way to do it than just, we're taking over, we're here now. And it's like, okay, you could do your own thing. You didn't have to jump into Marvel Comics, which it's like, for me, it's like, you know, I read comics and there's times where I'm like, okay, this is boring me, but I also know I'm not necessarily the intended audience. Right. I know this works for the majority of the people who pay for it.
Yeah.
And so I come and I enjoy the elements I like, and I go somewhere else for other elements that the comics might not have. And I think that's part of what led to Comicsgate, essentially, was it, and stuff like it was, oh no, we're going to change everything about this. Yeah. And it's like,
I mean, I tried to stay at a Comicsgate. I got hauled in a few times. I'm like, nope, not today, Satan, because I had already been through Gamergate, and that was another one where I thought some valid criticisms got dismissed because of the identity of the speakers, and I didn't think it was right, because I don't think it's right to do to others what you don't like doing to you. And for so many years I was dismissed in gaming because I was a woman, and so it was assumed I didn't know what I was talking about. And I can tell some stories about that, but you were going to say something. So,
and I think I don't like name dropping Comicsgate, just because I don't want to make things too hot, essentially.
Well, go for it. I'm fine. I mean, I already said I stayed out of it because not today, Satan. And so I think it's fair the comics gators listening to this, because I know some do. They're like, bah, 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 bah. That was a joke, guys.
Well, it's like, plus I was there. I was following diversity in comics when it all started, and I agreed with a lot of what he said. But I was also the first one going when all the crowdfunding started. I was in the Facebook group going, this is a terrible business model. This is not going to work. This is not going to pan out. And people would tell me, no, you're wrong. You just don't understand. And I'm shaking my head. And a few years later, sure enough, when EVS and Diversity in Comics are not delivering their crowdfunding on time and they're making the exact same excuses. So
okay, there's late, and then there's those books late, right?
Well, it's also something they used to criticize people for, especially Kwanzaa Osajeffo, who does the Black and the Black comic, which I don't think that one's very good, but whatever. Right. So it's like he would go on and make excuses and be like, oh, well, it's late for this and that reason, yada yada. And a lot of times it wouldn't even be a reason.
Right.
It would just be, it's late, yet what do you want me to do? And then, you know, the book would go out to comic book stores before it would actually get out to the backers. It was terrible. But then the Comicsgate people are doing the exact same thing. And they're making the exact same excuses, if not worse. And I'm sitting here going, I heckin' told you guys. Mm-hmm. And I also watched it. It's like the big people who you can tell I have been sitting on this for years.
And it's all coming out.
All these people who platform, they started doing the crowdfunding, they started making thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars, and all these other people tried to jump on it. You know, the little guys who were like, oh, I want to make a comic. And I'm looking at some of their ideas going, you're not a writer, you're not an artist, I'm sorry, you're not very good at this. Your pitch isn't very
comics good. Is hard. As somebody who's done it, it's hard.
Even just writing is hard. You know, I've met so many people who were like, oh, I want to write too. And you look at their writing and it's like, your writing sucks. I'm sorry.
But comics has a particular distribution challenge. Distribution and discovery challenge. It's hard. It's a hard business. I backed away from comics because I just didn't like all the fighting, and that was before Comicsgate happened.
And like the distribution issue is part of why I understood the appeal of Kickstarter, and well, they ended up using Indiegogo mostly.
But that's interesting.
Like, so you had from what I understand of what they would say, Kickstarter tends to lean more left, whereas Indiegogo is a bit more neutral.
I didn't know that. Okay.
So, apparently, just from what I've heard from watching them.
Okay.
So it's like you got all these big people, they made their thousands of dollars, they made a fortune on people, and some of them were absolute disasters. There was this one project where it got funded and it was supposed to be, okay, we're going to get this one comic out to you. They ended up using the money to establish a company and releasing single issues to Walmart, of all places.
I saw that one. Yeah.
And all the issues were in Walmart before the backers got it. And, you know, I had a couple of friends who had, you know, backed that one, and I watched them get so mad and be like, I'm never supporting them again. As soon as they got the book,
they were happy.
Like, you know, it's fine. I'd support them again. And I'm like, stop and think. You are men in your 40s and 50s. I expect more self-awareness from you.
Yeah, I mean, as somebody who is late on delivering on a Kickstarter right now, I'm owning this so somebody doesn't call me on it. It's because I got COVID and I got long COVID, and then Mary just got COVID, and there's a bunch of other things, but we've been communicating, right? Mm-hmm. And I do sometimes wonder how much to share. I mean, I avoided some of the grosser elements of my medical odyssey because obvious reasons. But yeah, and this is interesting because this was actually something I thought Comicsgate did better than Gamergate did, because Gamergate tried to go, look, we're not bad people. We gave all this money to charity, which, yes, if you're thinking, wow, this sounds familiar for a lot of things, you'd be right, which is why I keep getting in trouble criticizing the tactic. I don't care the good reason someone did it, right? It's just a logical fallacy that, oh, you give to charity, you're a good person. A lot of really shitty people, a lot of sociopaths give to charity to smoke screen their shitty behavior. But I said, you guys have to back projects. If you actually want the content you want to see, you have to back it. And so Comicsgate did that. Unfortunately, some of the creators just turned out to not be trustworthy. And I don't blame the people who back the projects for that.
No. Yeah. I didn't back any of them. I have friends who did, and some of them were like, hey, you know what? This was worth it for me. And some of them have said, you know what? I'm just going to stick to reading old pulps now.
And that's sort of what I do. I've been going back and reading comics from like the 90s. And I'm finding it very enjoyable. Modern comic, I keep trying to get back into DC. Marvel's a hot mess. Oh my God.
It's very millennial. Not it's not even in a way that can be accessible by people. And technically I'm late end millennial.
Yeah, but you've actually read the good stuff, and so your palette is different, right?
Yes, very.
Like, yeah, you're not reading nothing but YA well into your 30s.
Oh, I could say a lot about that too.
Well, I mean, as somebody who's worked in youth programming, YA confuses the shit out of me.
And I mean, this is something we talked about when we were discussing doing this topic and similar ones, is it's this mix of, I see people who do read YA, and there is a difference. It's the stories in YA tend to be more accessible in even when they're covering heavier topics, they tend to be a bit shorter, although that's not so true now, because now they're getting up to 1,000 pages, and oh my God, please stop.
It's set for a particular period in someone's life. What worries me is the authors, some of the authors are in their 50s, and a wisdom of looking back is sort of missing. And the thing I enjoyed about the stuff I read at that age was, okay, this is somebody further ahead than me teaching me how to adult.
That reminds me, my frustration with Avril Lavigne when I found Avril Lavigne when I was like 12 or 13, and I remember listening, it was like right as her second album came out, and I remember listening to those first two albums and getting a lot from it.
Oh, the first her breakout album was this interesting fusion. I mean, the fact that she started as an opener for Shania Twain and kind of blew up with Complicated, that was
interesting.
I interviewed Avril a couple times when I worked in music programming. The first time was, I was a producer on it. I didn't personally interview her, but the first time was on the roof of Fairview Mall. Anybody who knows what Fairview Mall is, it's not exactly one of the more glamorous malls. She blew up so unexpectedly. She was still doing mall tours.
Yeah.
When she was like number one on the chart. She was very unexpected. And I do think that the whole Chantal Kreviazuk phase, where her songs were, I mean, the third album for pop bands tends to be the I hate my life and want off this merry-go-round.
Okay, here's album. So let me finish my story really quick, because it does tie into what we were saying.
Yeah.
So first two albums, I'm 12, I'm 13.
Right.
Very raw. And I was going through a lot of really difficult things. So like those albums spoke to me.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they weren't reveling in it. Like a little, but it was still kind of hopeful, and there was a maturity to it. And so I was kind of like following it into a level of maturity. Her song Slipped Away, which she actually wrote for her grandfather who passed away. She was on tour.
I didn't know that.
She was on tour she was doing a concert in Hungary, I think it was, the day they called her and said, your grandfather passed away.
Okay.
And so I listened to that song over and over and over, and that was the song I mourned my grandfather with.
Oh.
So it's like I still can't listen to it without thinking about him.
Yeah, that's like Lady Gaga's Speechless for me.
Yeah. And so then we got to the third album, and it's so pop. And it's so commercial, and it feels so fake. And all her albums since then, I'm just like, I wanted to follow you into maturity. I wanted you to be someone who could kind of guide me through these very rough times that I had. But instead, I feel like I outpaced you, and I'm still looking back and going, what are you doing? And it's interesting because, like, you know, when she did her first album, she talked about how she showed up for her first photo shoot and they had all these dresses they want her to wear. And she told them, no, I'm going to wear my own clothes. That's not me. But now it seems like every time she has an album come out or a single or something, it's like, oh, well, yeah, I didn't actually want to write that song, or that wasn't what I wanted to do, but the label told me I had to. And I'm like, when you were 17, you were telling these people where to shove it. What happened?
Money and wanting to keep your staff employed, and no longer being the hot teen thing, now suddenly being one name in a very crowded landscape in terms of singer co-songwriters.
I'm still annoyed.
Oh, I agree with you. I didn't like her pivot to pop. I would have preferred she went back to her country roots. But yeah, I do think it was a lot of, well, like the minute an album doesn't sell great, all of a sudden the record company starts going, okay, you have to listen to us now or we're dropping you. And I prefer the artists who, but then again, I'm one who always puts principle over profits. And let me tell you, lately, that's been really, really friggin' hard to do.
And, you know, I think that's part of why I say indie artists, and that like has a certain meaning, but I mean like people who are on YouTube. I mean, my favorite musicians are like Carlene, Miracle of Sound, Aviators, which are people who are just on YouTube and they do this video game inspired rock or dark Celtic.
Right.
And so it's like very different. It's not something you're ever gonna find on the charts, really.
Right.
And it's like,
unless Katy Perry does it light.
I don't like Katy Perry.
Okay. Katy Perry is indeed very likable, but you know, it's more her persona than
now she's trying too hard, I think.
Well, yeah, the post-baby unrecognizable from surgery. I don't know. I love the whole left shark Katy Perry phase. I thought that was great. But yeah, I mean, see, we're spending a lot of time sort of going, oh, here we're being critical of female artists, and this is where we get called a pick-me or a traitor to our gender and all of that stuff. Meanwhile, guys don't have to worry about this shit.
God, and you know, we talked previously about how there's this huge issue of just going back to what I was saying about romance novels and just this, don't, you know, it's what women like. And I'm like, but it sucks. So much of it is so bad and your standards are so low. And it's like, I want there to be good romance. I like romance, and that's why I hate what's out there.
Yeah, I am all for self-aware trash.
Mm-hmm.
I just think that my issue with a lot of romance that I've tried to read is that there seems to be this self-hating element to it.
For a long time, and it's still an issue, but it's going out of style, was this whole not like other girls thing, where it was the I don't wear a lot of makeup, I'm not fashionable, I'm this or that. And it's like every girl wants to be different because we all want to be unique. At the same time, not everyone has the actual courage to be unique. Because being unique is actually kind of hard.
Yeah.
Like being different. And especially, you know, I've said it seems like just as I started to understand that labels aren't supposed to be what defines you and it's not what you're supposed to judge people on, was just when our whole society became obsessed with labels.
Yeah.
Like, I'm this, I'm that. And it's like, okay, I was talking to a coworker the other day about how he's like, yeah, I know these people who it's like, and he's 19. So like the people he knows and he's talking about are in that age group. And he's like, they take one thing and they make it their entire personality. And he showed me a story a guy he knows posted on Instagram. And apparently this guy really likes planes. And he's convinced the reason he's single is because women don't appreciate that he likes planes. And I'm like, the lack of self-awareness and just the whole story. And like, he showed me the story because he's like, this is so cringe, I have to show you. And it was like, oh my God.
I miss the days when, I don't know if you remember, before everything sort of exploded with incel this and incel that, it was sort of an internet rule that you left Wizard Chan alone because they were really unstable people at high risk of suicide, and you didn't want to push them. They were the one group that troll places were just like, no, they're too fragile to pick on. And I miss those days. And that's when somebody says girls don't like me because I don't like planes. That's sort of the instinct, or I like planes. That's the instinct that kicks in. But I do think that part of the reason romance gets dunked on unfairly is that reaction when, and it's the same reason people don't believe me when I say which type of people I am attracted to, because they're like, you must be lying because it's not, the romance cover guy. And but then the exact same people, when you comment on the impossible to replicate perfection of their waifu, oh, we know it's not real. But it's that, it's almost like a FOMO reaction in people that is very human, right? It's very, very human. And we can make attempts to deprogram it all we want, but there is always that rejection people feel when somebody's being held up as an ideal and it's not them.
Yeah.
And that's why I wish there were different types of guys at the center of straight romances, because this is why I think male fiction is popular with women, because it diversifies who's centered as attractive, right? And it just, so much romance is so samey, and I don't get why it's romantic.
It's this very, it's very much by the numbers, and it's tropes. I'm trying to find the right words. I mean,
well, it lacks what your stuff does, right? Your story, well, Calidus, sorry, is it's a bunch of quirky people whose quirks fit. None of them are square jaw McPerfect breeches. You know? And there's an element of humor to a lot of the scenarios that I find makes it very sweet. When I read a Harlequin romance, that isn't there. The lightness, these are people factor. It's like the thing that ruined Enchanted for me was what I liked about that is Amy Adams's character was somebody who made a dress out of curtains. And of course, how does she get the guy? She goes on a designer shopping spree by stealing his credit card. And it's like, no. I liked the making dress with curtains.
I know, right? And it's like, I get that they were going for this emphasis of the contrast to the fact that when they got to that final ball, she was wearing modern clothes, whereas he was wearing something a bit more fantasy and costumey. So it's like, I get what
they were doing fairy tale Grease.
Yeah. It was deliberate, but I get that. It's like shopping spree always bothered me.
Yeah. It's not, they ruined the whole modern fairy tale element, right? A credit card is not a fairy godmother.
No, they tried.
Well, I don't know. I just thought Take His Money, Ladies was a terrible extrapolation of marrying a handsome prince. Because it was a very cynical translation of the upward social mobility that happens in traditional fairy tales, right? And I feel like I should pivot to a defense of Disney adults right now, because Disney is, it's unfortunate, but Disney is some of the most commercially successful, critically acceptable storytelling for women out there. Every time there's a princess story, it is very, they do the mom character, the dad character, the brother character, the sister character. So it's not just for women. But
I mean, that's fairly recent, because you look back at the originals and there wasn't so much that.
Yeah, that's post Pixar. Disney was making stories for his daughters.
I'm gonna be honest, I don't actually like Pixar. I'm like, that is a very hot take, but I find them to be extremely overrated.
I don't like them as much as, say, the immediately pre-Pixar Disney Renaissance films, for sure. It's
the early, there's a sweet spot in Pixar where I do like some of their movies, but some of them I'm just like, I've seen Up once, and like it was well done and it was a good story, but I also have this reaction where when something is too popular and people make too big a deal out of something.
I completely agree. It was the first 10 minutes of Up that I think got everybody. Ironically, that is the form of all the episodes of The Last of Us that everybody is going crazy about. It's the first basically 10 minutes of Up. You tell it in the story of an entire relationship that ends in a loss. Like, okay.
And that's one of those things. There's so many of these stories that they hit these certain beats that will get an emotional response from you.
Yeah.
And I can't fall for it anymore. Like sometimes
I'm so with you.
Yeah. If I sit back and I'm like, okay, I'm just going to calm down. I'm just going to relax. I'm going to enjoy it. I can still enjoy it, but I'm still like, okay, but that, what button to push. And so it's like, I see the man behind the curtain. I get so frustrated that people don't they don't even, they're not aware there's a curtain, let alone a man behind it. And I'm like, we're falling for it. It's especially with the MCU fans where it's just like, oh my gosh, this thing. And I'm like, calm down.
Yeah,
it's not worth that.
The MCU stuff is starting to, this is going to be after Quantum Mania, people have seen it, but there's a shining example of something where I think that the hardcore supporters of it need to listen to another perspective. I also think the critics are being way too harsh on more post Endgame Marvel product, because I've enjoyed it for the most part. Is it the greatest thing in the world? No, it got disrupted by COVID. Are they attempting to tell different kinds of stories? Yes, they are. Friggin' good for them. Like they're very clearly centering streaming, right?
Yeah.
And
I mean that was one of the,
they don't have the budgets.
Yeah. And like that was supposed to be one of the big selling points for Disney Plus, because I remember Kevin Feige saying it when the platform first launched, where he's like, in order to understand this next phase, you're going to have to see the stuff on Disney Plus, which,
yeah, great.
Okay, that I saw this happen with Disney Star Wars, where so much of the movies did not make sense if you weren't reading the books. And it's like, while the Star Wars EU always had a lot of additional information, and you could read the books and appreciate little things about the movies, you didn't need to read the books to understand the movies.
Yeah.
Like most people,
a lot of video game franchises are doing this too, and it drives me crazy.
Yeah, it's this, I think it started with Destiny, actually.
Oh, really?
But Destiny did it very, very badly, the first game. Yeah, there was this lore where like you were supposed to go to an app or something.
Oh, and yeah. No, I mean, I'm talking things like Dragon Age, where they introduced characters in DLC and books. And so, you know, not only did you get a completely different sense of a character, it was very hard to really understand what was going on with this person if you didn't like track down all this. And some of the Dragon Age novels are very hard to get your hands on. Mass Effect's the same way. There's a critical lore point in a Mass Effect novel that really informs certain things that happen in Mass Effect 3, but I don't bother arguing with people about it, because nothing should be required. Things should be standalone stories.
Exactly. And external media should be an add-on.
It's called extended canon for a reason.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And like I think that was the first big mistake I saw Disney Star Wars make. Was it's like, you know, they managed to make us care about Alderaan in the first movie because they made it personal. And part of it was they were relying on tropes because, oh, hey, Star Wars was originally basically a pulp story and it's a B movie homage. So they could use tropes and they utilized them well. And so, okay, here's the princess in white. She is good. Here is the evil knight in black. We are supposed to dislike him. So when he threatens her homeworld, we don't have to see the homeworld. We don't have to see the people there, but we still care. Whereas we're going to destroy these 5 planets that we're not even going to name. And we don't even, okay, so it's the heart of the, I thought it was Coruscant at first.
Yeah.
I thought they destroyed Coruscant. Yeah. And then I read the novelization, and it's like in the novelization, there were a few additional scenes, such as like the woman we see at one point on the planet that as it's being destroyed is Leia's aide. Mm-hmm. So it's like we got to see the aide earlier in the novel. So like we had an association with her. Right. But you couldn't have that in the movie because you can't have Leia show up until the big reveal. Right. Which is like, dude, this is very, very bad storytelling.
I mean, that's Filoni. right? Dave
Mhm.
Filoni thinks everybody has an encyclopedic knowledge of all 7 seasons of the Clone Wars and Rebels. And so a character shows up in The Mandalorian and it's this big dun dun dun, assuming that you know who this person is. And if you don't know who Cad Bane is, a lot of stuff in, I don't even remember what friggin' series that was
The
now.
Book of Boba Fett.
Okay, there you go. There was a lot of it in Book of Boba Fett, but also that Katie Sackhoff character in, was that season 2 of Mando? Yeah, because they're that other sect of Mandalorians that are more hardcore. And, you know, she shows up with the Darksaber, and a lot of that stuff's lost on people that didn't, like, not just watched Clone Wars and watched Rebels, they watched it in sequence, which is no guarantee in the way they run children's programming.
And here's the thing. I watched Clone Wars, but I watched it very fast
Yeah.
while I was drawing at the same time.
Yep. Yeah.
I don't remember 3/4 of it.
It doesn't stay in my brain.
No, it's, and you know, I do think they did a decent job with Ahsoka.
Oh yeah.
In Mandalorian. Bo-Katan,
Yes.
not so much. I am very curious to see what happens in the next. I'm so excited for the next season.
I am so excited too. I just, okay, yay, we can get excited about something Star Wars again. I didn't mind Obi-Wan Kenobi for what it was. Okay. And I know we're just doing all the unpopular takes today. I couldn't finish Andor.
I still need to try.
I couldn't finish it. I thought Rogue One was a great movie up until the last 10 minutes, and I don't watch Star Wars to see, okay, spoiler if you haven't seen it, but I just don't care about that dude, but Cassian Andor, enough to be that bored for that many episodes. I didn't even make it to Andy Serkis. And I keep like, I gotta go back and try it. I'm like, no, why? They wasted 6 episodes of my time. Why do they get more?
Yeah. And it is that thing where it's like, you have to value your audience's time. And
premium cable and streaming have gotten so shitty about that though. They know that people will give it 3 episodes. So they waste fucking time.
I hate it. I saw a tweet, I think, where it talked about the difference between, like, I don't remember what the comparison was, but it was like, okay, in this type of show, it might have been anime or something. It's like, by the end of the first episode, let's say you've got 2 stories about a surfer. By the end of the first episode, he'll have his surfboard. He'll be getting on the water. However,
establish what this shit is about.
But whereas Netflix, he's not going to get his surfboard until the end of the first season.
It's true.
And it's like, stop. It's, you know, sometimes I feel nervous a bit about how slow the first volume of Calidus feels. Because it's like, the stakes aren't super high. Because, like, it's still building stuff up and introducing a lot of characters. And a lot of stuff happens. It's just, there's a reason I serialize it rather than just doing a novel, because it...
Okay, I don't mind reveals being slow. It's just, will you get to the fucking point? Like, the number of shows that spend entire episodes on a secondary character. It's season 3 of a streaming or episode 3 of a streaming or premium cable show is always the backstory now of a secondary character. So and I'm so bored.
I have not watched The Last of Us. I do not intend to watch The Last of Us.
Because you're not going to give it a try at all?
No, because I don't do monsters.
See, I was waiting for a particular plot point to happen because that was the point I almost stopped playing the first game. Because the problem The Last of Us as a franchise is the more popular it got, it's the Twilight phenomenon, right? The first book was interesting, but flawed because it just felt like somebody pouring out their heart via taboos into a novel, right? The
Mhm.
more popular Twilight got, the more it was that thing you were talking about, Avril Lavigne, that it just seemed more and more written to appeal to the Christian book lists.
Which is so ironic.
I know, but
But
that's who bought it, right?
yeah.
And yeah,
let me finish what I wanted to say about The Last of Us before I forget, because I did bring it up for a reason. So I haven't been watching it, but I don't think my best friend has either, but his sister's been watching it with her husband. And so when I think it was episode 3 where it was the gay couple.
Yeah, Frank and Bill.
The strap. So he said his sister was talking and his brother-in-law were talking to him about it, and they were like, it's a great story, but it wastes time and it doesn't actually do anything for the plot.
See, except, yeah, if you don't know the story, it just feels like a regression. And I mean, they mention them briefly in episode 1. It is handled differently than the problem with the show right now is every episode just feels like a completely different thing from the episode that preceded it. The different directors, it doesn't work the way it does in The Mandalorian. But that, what I thought was I thought that the Bill and Frank episode managed a level of emotional depth and nuance that the game never did. And it gave me hope for the show, because obviously the franchise falls off a cliff in the second game, and apparently they're going to blitz through the first season, and then second season I don't know what they're thinking. I don't know what they're thinking. I don't know where they go. I wish they'd made Days Gone instead of The Last of Us, because wow, if they stick to the script, and they are changing a lot, so it's possible they won't, but some of it, see, I have real issues about the Neil Druckmann directed episode of The Last of Us HBO, but it's too soon to talk about because I can't even talk about the games anymore without somebody screaming, "Oh my God, spoilers about the show." And we don't know if they're going to stick to that.
So I told you, I think I told you about this. So we had a district manager come into work and he was talking about The Last of Us and like, oh, you all need to, he's like, oh, is anyone watching it? And I'm like, no, I haven't even played the games, but like I'm still salty about how that second game went.
Holy shit.
And so I'm like, no, I'm salty about the games. And he's like, oh, well, if you put your sour grapes aside, it's really good. And I'm like, part of me wanted to be like,
to watch things.
Yeah, well, but I also wanted to be like, I didn't enjoy watching Joel get beat to death with a golf club, and it's like, okay, I haven't actually watched it.
It's horrible. It is awful. It is grotesque.
Yeah, and it's like I don't actually have. I think I've seen little clips of it from like the leaks and stuff.
It's horrendous,
but it's like I don't even because I understand it on principle. The problem is I can't explain that to most people. So it's like, I will pretend that I've seen it.
Okay, but it's not just Joel. The two playable characters in that game both horrifically beat people to death in unnecessarily brutal ways. It's not just Abby. Ellie does it in the games too.
And I think there is this, I'll be honest, I see it a bit more on the left, this fantasy of violence. And
I think I know where you're going with this, and that this is a deep well. And I think it ties into the topic of this is legitimate criticism with, The Last of Us is obviously female. The main characters are female, but it's not for women.
No.
Right. And I think it's an important distinction, as opposed to like, this is a property where it would do well to listen more to the critics. If I keep going, because I think I know where you're going with this, and this is really valid.
I don't even know where I'm going with this, but I mean,
yeah, okay.
I mean, I do a bit. There is this, I see it a lot in women where it's like they want to brutalize men, especially for some perceived slight.
Yeah.
And it's just like, it's grotesque in a lot of ways, like you said.
Well,
It's
I
just,
mean, I you know how you read certain or place certain things and it's not okay, this was somebody with something to say. It's wow, this is somebody who is working some shit out.
oh yeah.
You know, that's how The Last of Us lands with me. That it's not theme, it's not character, it's this is a self-hating left-wing man thinking every man is as bad as him and needs a beating because he's terrible, Joss Whedon style. And then he just can't stop his creepy fetishes involving women. Like, he can't. Even as he hates himself for it, he can't. And it's like, dude, seek help. You know, and I just can't unsee it. It's the Whedon thing all over again. Even the feet stuff in Tarantino films, right? And then, you know, Tarantino infamously did not stand up for actresses who were preyed on by Harvey Weinstein. But he got all this credit for putting Uma Thurman, strong female character, but it wasn't actually representing women. It wasn't giving women more of a voice or more of a center. It was a fetish. He likes chicks with swords and with nice feet. That's not a character. And I'm seeing, I mean, Bella Ramsey's amazing in The Last of Us. If anybody does watch it, she's the reason to. Pedro Pascal so far hasn't been given a lot to do. That seems
they're coasting off that Pedro Pascal is daddy energy.
Well, yeah, it's Mandalorian without the mask, right? And not even because, oh God, how do I put this out? Spoiling things. It's one of those Alan Rickman and Sweeney Todd problems of they keep saying you see his past and you see his emotional pain. You do not see the terrible things he's done in the subsequent 20 years. And therefore, when Tess is going on and on and on, and Anna Torv, oh my God, I love Anna Torv. So happy to see her on screen. But when she keeps saying, we're terrible people, we've done terrible things, it doesn't feel real because we've seen what he went through. We don't see what he did. And it violates the show don't tell rule.
Which is one of those big rules that people don't understand so much.
And that's why I think what happens in the games with Abby, you see her do something horrible, right? And so it just seems so unfair. And this is where we get into I can't tell if this is a werewolf cookbook review, because to me, zombie fiction talks about our fears as a people, right? The idea of losing your mind, of just becoming a mindless horde. When we were worried about things like HIV, there were a lot of virus zombie myths, right? And the idea of sort of with Night of the Living Dead, it was very much and this isn't me, guys. I read papers on this. There was a collectivist fear back then that, oh, everything's a horde, everything's the collective, you're losing your will to the collective. And that's the fear that it was going.
That was also a response to some of the consumerism in the 80s. That's wasn't right.
It? Yeah. And then you get wonderful things like Shaun of the Dead, where they have that sequence where Nick Frost turns into a zombie and Shaun doesn't notice. And because he's such a couch potato. I thought that was a great moment.
And there's like at least one movie from the 80s where it's like you have zombies in the mall.
Yeah.
In particular.
Oh, that's shit. Yeah, I know the one you're talking about, and I can't think of the name. The Dead Rising franchise borrowed from that too. And like, that's the thing. It says something about culture right? And some of the I mean, obviously they're really pandering regarding people's COVID trauma, and it kind of makes me angry that way. Because I thought I was relatively okay with it, but that first episode I was like, shit, do we really have to relive this too soon? You know, of the whole thing about shit going down and nobody really knowing and nobody what's causing this illness, and we don't know how bad it really is, and the government's not telling us everything, and fuck, I don't want this, right? Like, no, too soon.
No, it's
but again, I'm not the typical premium cable viewer. But go ahead. I just want to be clear. People are like, but it's so powerful. Yes, okay. I get that people watched The Walking Dead and like The Walking Dead because of the terrible people, not in spite of it. I just don't. Can I please have shows about good people?
Oh my God, please, yes.
Is it so much to ask?
There is this whole, it's like, it's Batman versus Superman, and people deciding that Batman is better because he's dark and he's edgy and he's got pain.
That's what was it with me with Justice League, is Superman hurting cops. Oh my God, no.
And it's like, and then they gave us Zack Snyder's Superman, and it's like, Henry Cavill was perfect.
Perfectly cast shit scripts.
Exactly. Yeah. And you know, that's why I'm sure Cavill is like, no, if I'm doing anything now, I'm gonna produce that shit myself.
Yeah. I mean, you know how I feel about him taking on Warhammer. I'm so stoked.
If anyone can do it, it's him.
Yeah.
And it's, you know,
I'm so stoked. I know people are super sad, and for him, I would have liked to have seen him get another kick at the can at Superman, but I just think
just one movie, because you could tell he was as happy as almost anyone else to say a hopeful, happy Superman.
Yeah, like, and that we'll still get that, and we never know, right? I mean, Brandon Routh got his shot to play basically Earth 2 Superman in the CW Crisis crossover, and he was amazing. It was such a wonderful redemption for him as a performer.
That is something DC has always been really good at, is reusing actors in a way.
Yeah, I mean, Marvel, that is the part that, you know, James Gunn is picking up from his experiences at Marvel. He said that now one person will play the same character across all media, and I think that that's the right call, because I mean, I know I was down on the Flash movie in part because I really like Grant Gustin as Barry Allen, and I think Ezra Miller is miscast.
I agree. I hate how much I like that trailer, though. Like, it actually looks kind of interesting.
I watched it on Nerdette's newsstand, and Tristan was freaking out, so excited, happy. It was the absolute best way to watch the trailer, because her infection, it was so infectious. Her enthusiasm was just that is fandom to me. Seeing someone really freaking exciting.
Nerdette, she loves things.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm too cynical, but I'm so glad she just loves things.
I'm the same way. I love it when people just like stuff. I have another friend. He loves some things I think are hot garbage, but I sometimes I listen to him because, how do I put this? Because he is a human and I am not. You know what I mean? It's the difference between just consuming the stuff and working in the industry. It is so nice to see someone just react to things without the baggage.
Okay, so my best friend is a Darth Vader fanboy.
Uh-oh.
And I love it. He gets so excited whenever it comes up, like the Rogue
Vader
One
or Anakin?
Vader.
Okay.
I think it's the armor.
The armor is cool, no joke.
Yeah, so it very much fits my friend to really be into the armor and the badass overall look of it all. And so it's like that Rogue One scene where Vader shows up.
Okay.
He loved it so much. And so it's like, I don't care. I'm not a big Vader fan, but it's like when he starts talking about that or games he likes or stuff, he's been into Warhammer lately. And I'm like, this means nothing to me, but I am very happy you're happy. And I enjoy listening to you be happy.
I love listening to Warhammer fans talk about why they love Warhammer, because it is this nihilistic, brutal world. But all the hardcore Warhammer fans I know, they connect to the impossible choices certain characters have to make. And this is why it's really important not to just brush stuff off. I know we're talking about fair criticism, but I do think that the capacity to listen to people experience joy, to be, as a critic, as somebody who used to review video games, it was very important to me to touch, proverbially touch grass when it comes to liking stuff, because I had somebody talk to me for half an hour the other day about this one Horus Heresy character. I'm blanking on the name now. For some reason, I can see the character's face, but I've just watched Willow, the first episode of Willow, so every character is Mad Mardigan in my head. Don't ask me to explain that.